Hi, this is Kyle Higgins, and you're listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
Hello and welcome to the Comics Concierge Podcast, the podcast that believes comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. This is one of my weekly rundown episodes where I talk about the comic book week that was, some of the most notable titles, and I give you my thoughts and opinions on those that I read. And it's been a really busy week in comics, a lot to get to. But first, I do want to let you know that I do get into some spoilers. I try to leave out the major twists and turns, but if you're someone who wants to know nothing about the actual comic they're about to read, check the episode notes, and I'll be listing all the times I'll be spending on each comic I'll be talking about on this episode. I do start each week with my recommendation of the week, and my recommendation of the week is a little bit different. It's not necessarily the best book of the week. Sometimes it ends up being copacetic, and it is. More so what I try to do is pick out what I think is the best starting point for that week, whether you're a new comic reader, an old comic reader, and it's a starting point that doesn't feel redundant or unnecessary. There's a lot of books that will start over again, but if you read it before, you feel like, well, I know all this. Obviously helps when it's a brand new issue for a brand new series no one's read before. So this week was quite easy, and it's Gideon Falls, #1 by Jeff Lemire and Andre Sorrentino. If you listen to this podcast at all in its infancy, you know that I'm a huge Jeff Lemire fan. I feel like I talk about him each episode, in large part because he has so many huge titles out right now, so many notable titles. I don't know when this man sleeps. He puts out so much work and so much work at a high level consistently. Royal City, Black Hammer, and now adding to the list a new series with longtime creative partner and Andre Sorrentino. They've done different work before. They worked on most recently Old Man Logan, and they're two people that just seem to go together really nicely, which is interesting because I think why they work so well together is how different they are in the way they tell their stories, which may seem like that should be the opposite. If they're so polar opposite, they shouldn't work together. Jeff Lemire to me is a very minimalistic type of storyteller. From the way he does draw to the stories he tells, he tends to get the most out of the least. Where Andre Sorrentino, he puts so much on the page. It is his innovative panel stylings. He does some things that no one really has ever done before. For me, looking at comics right now, he is the most inventive artist we have going. Every time I pick up one of his books, I'm like, I'm going to see something that I've legitimately never seen before in a comic, and I can't really think of many other artists that I can say that to, really anyone else. And that's the same here. I think they just complement each other well. Jeff Lemire knows how to stage a story. He knows how to get at the humor and drama of any type of situation, whether it is a more straightforward story or if it's like this, which is a very horror-based atmospheric tale. And then Andre Sorrentino just takes it from there, puts everything he can on the page, really gives you something to sink your teeth into on every level. Horror is a genre that is so much built upon just feeling and emotion or intensity, and it's hard to do that in a comic and do it effectively. There's a lot of horror comics out there, and they tend just to put a lot of darkness or a lot of gore or try to, in order to get that type of feel. This isn't that. It gets it more of it's more cerebral in its execution. The story itself centers on two really major characters. One is a man who is certainly mentally unstable in some instances, or maybe he's not, and we are the ones that are all mentally unstable, but he's finding different patterns in the trash, and a part of the comic is him having a conversation with his therapist and what he's doing and his methods behind everything. The bulk of the story is on a priest who comes to this town, who was coming to replace a priest who passed away, and he was placed in this small little Hoboken town that you think that nothing bad ever happens. He meets some of the people that work at the church. You have this nice old lady in a cat sweater, and she looks like, everyone's favorite grandmother or person that like you would just get cookies from every weekend or something of that nature. And there is just this sense that something is wrong, based upon a lot of what Sorrentino does. And by the end of the issue, there is something off. That there are things afoot. It is a slow burn, but it's not one of those stories that leaves you questioning in the sense of, is this in someone's mind? Is there anything really going on here? You know there's things going on because the final page is a revelation that will have, huge consequences moving forward. And overall, it's just like, it's so much whets the appetite for what's to come. The overall concept is not revolutionary, the idea of like a priest and some sort of psychotic person trying to determine what's the secret meaning behind everything, but the execution is brilliant. This is one of the best new series of the year, best first issues of a series in quite some time, and I just really can't wait for what it has to offer. If you're at all looking to get into something this weekend, if you're looking to get into a new series, this is a great jumping on point. There's nothing you need to know beforehand, even if you never read a book from these people ever before. This, I think, will get you excited to read more from them because there's so much here. I highly recommend it. If I was just going based upon what I thought was the best comic of the week, this would probably be up there, probably be number one, honestly. It was just such an effective story, and highly, highly recommend it. This was actually one of the biggest weeks for Image in some time. Not only do they have a new series debuting with Jeff Lemire and Andre Sorrentino, the man that really revolutionized Image these last few years, Robert Kirkman, also has a new series debuting with Oblivion Song, which is also drawn by Lorenzo Di Felicia. And his art is fantastic. Really, that's the first thing that is noticeable. The first opening pages, you see this character in this crazy-looking town. It ends up being Philadelphia. It's got this insane vegetation growing off of it and this gigantic monster. It's super colorful. It really catches your eye, considering Robert Kirkman's known for something like Walking Dead or Invincible. It's a very change of pace when it comes to just the presentation of the book right from the get-go. And the overall story is this idea that some time ago there was this event that occurred in Philadelphia that caused a large chunk of people to be transported to this other dimension. It's hard not to think of something like the Upside Down or from Stranger Things or something of that nature, where it's the framework of where you're at looks like your normal location, but everything else is distorted, and it's like a hell on earth, basically. And this dimension occurs at a different frequency, and a lot of people were lost. It's now a decade later, and they have developed technology that were able to go back to this and get people and bring them back to the regular Earth. The opening of the story indicates that right away. And I think what's intriguing about this is that it certainly has a lot of allegorical implications to today's world. This idea that it is a society that is reeling from a disaster that happened over a decade ago, and some people are still holding on hope that the main character is still attempting to free more people. He's trying to bring more people back, but his funding isn't there because people think that everyone they couldn't get back, it's time to let go and move forward. There's no one really left to get. That then does beg intriguing question in the sense of, when is the right time to let go? How do you move past an event like that? Is it right to move past it? Is it part of the healing process? Completely changed the world. It was devastating. People lost their lives. How long do you let that stick with you? Do you get to a point where, as a society, as a person, that the correct decision is to say, okay, that happened, we've dealt with it, we're still going to remember it and still think about the people that we lost, but we can't allow it to dominate our overall behavior. We can't let it dominate our lives. We have to be able to move forward. That's an intriguing conversation to have. That's like a different thing to take a comic at, because we see a lot of comics that have a dystopian future where everything's gone to hell. There's no fixing anything. It's all about surviving. And this isn't so far. It might get to that point, but this first issue to me was more about how do you emotionally move forward when you are set as a society. When is the right time to do that? It's a good question. It's almost an impossible question to answer. And added to that, you have the personal stakes of the fact that the main character's brother still has not been found yet. So he has his reasonings for not wanting to let go, and then is he allowing his personal feelings to cloud his actual judgment? So is he being heroic or is he being selfish? This is just immediately great setup for a good story. This is Robert Kirkman doing what Robert Kirkman does. As a writer, he tends to really excel at character development and and subverting the expectations of the genre that he's residing in, or getting you to care about the characters, getting you to feel for them, and then destroy their lives, basically. It's hard to do that with one issue. You're not going to have a lot of growth with a character in one issue. So I was wondering how it would work. Like, there's probably not another creator out there that has as much pressure on a comic than he does because of who he is. His name is out there. He's part of the biggest TV show in the world right now, still, even if it's not as popular as it once was. And I think it was really strong issue. My one issue with it was the ending, and I don't want to get everything away, but I'll just say that I felt that setup that I loved, that setup I thought could lead to a lot of great storytelling that is very different than the typical way a situation like this is handled, is very much undercut, and I'm worried that it'll go a different direction and go kind of the direction that is more stereotypical. I don't necessarily expect that with Robert Kirkman's story, but the ending that was supposed to be this, oh my god, that's happening, had the opposite effect. It's never great when a book ends like that for you. And again, that's more of a personal take for me. I mean, I'm certain some people loved it and thought it only increased their anticipation for the next issue. And one of the best things about this book, although that ending didn't make me as exciting as I wanted to, one thing that did make me really excited is the letter that Kirkman has in the end. And one of the biggest issues with Image in really all indie titles is you get really vested into a book, and then it's gone for 6 months, sometimes a year. There's often delays, and it happens when you have indie creators or creators who their day job may not be writing books, and they have to build time in order to maintain the quality they want to maintain. The good thing about this is that they're already working on issue like 13 or so they are far ahead of the game, and that's what happens when you have someone like Robert Kirkman who has the pull to say, I'm going to make this comic, I know it's going to sell well, so much so that we'll be able to just keep going with it. Not many people could do that, and people are probably wondering, like, why doesn't every creator do that? Why doesn't every indie creator do that? It's a lot in order to put that pressure on it. There's no guarantee for a lot of creators that their book is going to sell the way they want to. So to spend that much time and end up not being able to actually capitalize on it, it would be devastating for most people. So Kirkman doesn't necessarily have to worry about that. So he has that flexibility. I wish more creators did have that flexibility, and think comics would be better for it if more people would support more creators. But for now, I'm just happy with the fact that we know the first trade is done, so there's no expected delays. And that's the case with most Kirkman series that we'll talk about more later, that we rarely get delays. He tends to always get his stuff done on time, and it's regular. It's why Walking Dead's like a top 10 comic for forever now. And so Oblivion Song and Gideon Falls, two new great series coming out at the same week. It's great for Image. It's great for comics. Go out and support them because they deserve your money. They deserve your time. You won't be upset about it. So Image was not the only indie title with a brand new comic this week. Also, Oni had The Ballad of Sang #1, and right off the bat, I will say, if you are a martial arts fan, you love kung fu films, you love the idea of one person literally kicking the crap out of a bunch of people. If Kill Bill is your favorite Tarantino film, you're going to like The Ballad of Sang. It's about this young kid who may not look like much, but he packs a kick and a punch for sure, and he's not to be messed with. And we see opening that he is an enforcer, not an unlikely enforcer, but he's a enforcer nonetheless, although sometimes his actions have major repercussions, and we see that here. For an overall first issue, what I think this does well is that it makes Sang into a character that is one that you want to know more about. You see that he's actually deaf, or at least mute, and he utilizes sign language, and he has this master that he has somewhat of a relationship with. And the events of the plot unfold in a way that gets you invested into what he needs to now do or how he needs to survive moving forward. The overall story plot was okay. Like it's not anything that, if anything, I felt like it could do a little bit more to establish these characters in a way where right now they're a little morally irreprehensible. And yes, they may be the lesser of two evils, but considering the things that happened, you're like, well, that's kind of, yeah, that should have happened based upon the choices that you made as a character. Again, I'm not against characters making wrong decisions or leaving opportunity for them to grow and become better people. I think that's what's happening here. But if you're a person that when you read a new comic, you want to have a good feeling for where the character is and what his motivations are outside of just the narrative motivations, I don't know if this really had it. But in the simple idea of a book that was full of a lot of fun and action, and the art was fantastic, it had a lot of that kinetic energy. The panel layout really made the martial arts feel like you were watching a classic martial arts film. The way they utilized knives and it was very fun. It was an enjoyable read, and I think it has a lot of potential to continue to grow. But there are pieces of here that I think it could have made it a stronger first issue that weren't. So a solid recommendation for sure. But if I'm looking at all the new number ones that came out this week, this is the one I'm going to tell you to go out and rush and get immediately. This is one that probably maybe even be better for trade based upon what happened here. And I'm going to pick up the next issue, so if that says anything about it. But that also because I do love martial arts, and I love the idea of just seeing where the story goes. So we remove ourselves from some new series for a moment and talk about a character that's been around since really comics has been in their infancy, with Batman number 41, written by Tom King. I've been loving Tom King's run on Batman. I know there is a large contention in the internet that is not a fan of what he's doing with this character. I love what he's doing with Batman. To me, he is one of the few creators that I've read do a Batman story where I feel like Batman is actually the main person, the main character in his own book. It's not about the villain's plot. It's not about whatever situation he's being thrown into. I feel like I'm learning more about him as a character. And even with this relationship with Catwoman that's been going on, I've loved this relationship. It's been a relationship story for some that may not be what they want for a Batman title. They want more punching and kicking. I want great character study. I want great storytelling. I want great structure, and that's what Tom King excels at no matter who's drawing this book. This I Love Ivy story, though, has been different for him. It's more of a massive story, bringing in characters from all across the DC universe, as Ivy somehow has gained control of the entire world, and the only people that aren't under her control are Batman and Catwoman. And it seems Batman's trying to play his games to show that Poison Ivy is not benefiting the world the way that she thinks she is. It seems to be his attempt to try to showcase her hypocrisy in some way. So this is him being a detective, him trying to figure things out, him in a situation where punching and kicking is not going to lead to success, because you have Superman literally floating above you, ominous presence just waiting to strike because I was able to control him. And what I also like about this too is it showcases just how much Batman knows about all these different people. Not only does he know their powers, but he knows how well they know their powers and things they do to overcome their weaknesses. And he's utilizing that to kind of get under Ivy's skin or find ways to outsmart her or beat her at her own game. So this is I like this idea. There's some interesting developments here. I think this issue to me was better than the first issue that just laid out the scenario, and it almost felt like a prologue that was pushed out into the entire issue. Here there's much more development, still not 100% certain everything that's going on. I do think there is an underneath layer to this that makes me wonder if we are experiencing reality at all, if this is actually not more of a game than we realize. And Batman continues to be really great. I don't know if this issue is going to be one that will convert someone who's not like Tom King to become a Tom King fan. I'm sure the things that they don't like about the book are here as well, but I like what he's doing with his character, and it continues just to be in one of my favorite books DC's putting out since he took it over. Not to be outdone with Batman, we have Batman White Knight number 6, and Sean Murphy, man, you are a gift to the world of comics. You're a gift to the world of Batman. Yes, I love what Tom King is doing, but this is Sean Murphy writing and drawing his own story, and I just, from the way you draw Batman, he draws Batman, from the way you draw Batmobiles, oh my goodness, Batmobiles in this, 2 iconic Batmobiles, one of my favorite Batmobiles makes an appearance, and I'm not a type of person that tends to get really excited by that, but just the way it plays out in the story, and this, for those that know, this Batman White Knight story, the overall general concept was the idea of the Joker trying to do good in order to finally defeat Batman at his own game, basically, where he is turning, doing a 180, where Batman is more looked at as the villain and he is looked at more as the hero, by pointing out all the moral quandaries a character like Batman can cause, and the ones that we've come to just accept as a norm as a society. And then also going on, though, you have the Neon Joker, who's Harley, but a different Harley, with this plot to really take revenge on everyone because she feels like she's been forgotten. This actually has a lot of strong female characters in it. You have Neo Joker, you have Harley, the regular Harley, and Batgirl. And Batgirl seems like to be the only one that is like looking at this and thinking, we're all crazy. Why aren't we doing this? We're all, we need to take a step back and figure things out, where everyone else is just being stubborn and not listening to her. But this was a great addition. This is 6 of 8, so we only have 2 more issues left, which makes me really sad because I've been loving this series. I love the idea of someone playing with the world of Batman, and Sean Murphy's taking like every different form of Batman and doing an amalgamation of everything from Batman 89 to Batman the Animated Series to classic cartoon Batman to just the Batman comics. This is its own world, really. I don't know what world it would be or what have you, but it's not necessarily your typical DC universe. No other character has shown up that's not a Batman character, and I just love what he's doing. It's coming certainly from a person who loves Batman, but also can view the character in a different light and has a more freedom to tell a story like this, since it's not tied to continuity or anything like that. And I love stories like this. I love when a creator can cut loose and not have to care about where this story is going in 30 years from now, because it's self-contained. And DC really does excel at that. I think All-Star Superman, for example, this is Batman's version of All-Star Superman, where All-Star Superman was probably more earnest and uplifting. This is much more depressing. Not that it's a sad book. It's really exciting and enjoyable, but it doesn't necessarily have the earnestness or the optimistic viewpoint of something like All-Star Superman. But it's great. It's fantastic. If you're a Batman fan, you're not reading this, go ahead and do that. Like, you have a few more issues, so it gets in trade, so you're better off just looking for it in trade. But if you're looking for a great book, this is an awesome series to start reading, and I highly, highly recommend it. One of the best series of last year and continues to be one of the best series of this year. Staying in the world of DC, but going in a very different direction with Exit Stage Left, the Snagglepuss Chronicles. And for some people who maybe have not read the Flintstones comics from last year or last few years and wondering why there's a Snagglepuss comic, you may want to go back. You definitely want to go back and read Mark Russell's Flintstones book. It was an amazing comic, one of the most sharply witted, best examples of social commentary of any medium in some time. Sad to see it end, but I ended up being rather excited for this book, Snagglepuss. I never thought those would be words that would come out of my mouth, but hey, they showed they could take a concept out of really much anything and do a wonderful comic about it. And the twist with this, or the concept with this, has been that Snagglepuss is this playwright during the Red Scare period, during the Cold War. He's a Tennessee Williams-like playwright who is also a homosexual, but not in public eye, obviously, because at the time it was very taboo and really forbidden. And so he's living this life, and the U.S. government has been trying to utilize him as a propaganda piece to promote like American nationalism of the time, knowing that they're so scared about this communist Red Scare. And if you know anything about the history of Hollywood at the time, a lot of writers were blacklisted and were never able to really write again. Some of them were basically, shunned and did some work that they were never credited for, or used pseudonyms. Some just were shooed out of the business forever, and it led some really depressing lives. It was a really gigantic scandal that dominated Hollywood for some time, and it took a while for some people to come back. There's a lot of movies about it. The comic The Fade Out touches upon it. The movie Trembo with Bryan Cranston talks about his part in it. The character, the person of Trembo, he was a influential figure at the time. So this is seeped in history. Again, not seeped in really present-day commentary, but I think in a way it does relate. And this book has been much different than the Flintstones. There's not as much humor, really. It's much more dramatic and depressing. But considering the fact that you're dealing with a lot of these heady topics, it makes sense. It also doesn't really focus in on the Snagglepuss aspect as much as the Flintstones. The Flintstones book, even though it was much different than the cartoon of back in the day, it still had a lot of those tropes you would expect for the Flintstones, a lot of the punny jokes, a lot of the elements of Flintstones that have been utilized since the beginning. Using different animals for vacuum cleaners, for example, which was one of the best characters in that series. But this, for the most part, Snagglepuss and everyone, like Huckleberry Hound, they're treated as normal people or normal beings, even though he's a gigantic purple cat and Huckleberry Hound's a gigantic dog. But I think reason why that they don't have a lot of those other pieces is because the world of these two characters, or the world of Snagglepuss, is not as distinct as that of the Flintstones. I think Flintstones certainly has its own type of aura about it compared to Snagglepuss, who honestly I knew nothing about really, all outside of the fact that he said even all the time. And most people can't talk about this book without trying to do a Snagglepuss impersonation. I will not attempt, because I cannot succeed at doing that. This issue was, I think, my favorite of the series so far. The title of it is Actors and Stars, and a through line between it is how Snagglepuss, or his viewpoint about how there's difference between the theatrical acting or on the play versus TV acting, and how you have stars and actors and what they mean. Like, stars are who we idolize, actors who reveal who we are. And I think it's a really poignant point that does get to how art is consumed in different ways. And the question I have, though, is if the book itself, if Mark Russell, the creators, are in the same boat as Snagglepuss, or are they being critical of him, or they think his viewpoint is incorrect. I think that's been going to be a piece of this moving forward. There's a lot of things circling in the background. Everything is kind of okay right now, but there's hints that things will be going very dark very soon for the life of Snagglepuss. We also have some big cameos in this, and I don't want to ruin them, but some iconic people of the time. A great scene with former or current Yankees baseball player in a diner that I thought was quite hilarious. This is a really smartly written story. I think there are probably a lot of things that it's pointing to, a lot of references that it's making that go well beyond my head, but I just love the way it's approaching this idea. It is so sophisticated in a way that I was not expecting. I love the Flintstones, but I think I like the Flintstones more compared to this, but it's a much different beast. This is a little more subdued, I would say, which is weird to say about a book starring a gigantic pink tiger, but it is. And I don't know, I could see this not working for a lot of people. I could see a lot of people who even love the Flintstones book reading this and being let down because it doesn't have that comedic element as much, or it's not as overt. But I think I just love those. They're really making me a fan of Snagglepuss. I love the look of this book. How he's the sharpest dresser in the world, and I love I'm a big fan of the Hollywood story that it's telling. Like, I love the fade out because it tied into there. I just find that time of the world really full of intriguing dilemmas that they were facing. How you had people trying to placate to the government, but also be artists at the same time. There's a lot to really go into it, and then there's a lot, of course, allegorical implications to today's society, of seeing how a lot of these topics are certainly brought back to our world that we're living in today. But it's never overtly done. It's never done to the point that it's too heavy-handed. I think we have seen that with some of the other Hanna-Barbera books that have come out. I'm thinking of, like, the Jetsons, which I was not able to get through after the first few issues, and a lot of the other Hanna-Barbera stuff was much different and not nearly as good, but this has been pretty fantastic. Okay, let's move out of the world of DC for the moment and go to the world of Marvel. Marvel had a lot of big books this week as well. Let's start with X-Men Red #2. I like the first issue of X-Men Red a lot. I actually have given up reading X-Men Blue and Gold. They just were not doing it for me. They got bogged down in a lot of crossovers. There was a Mojo Universe crossover, then they had a Venom crossover, and none of the stories really grabbed me. I liked Blue for a while, but eventually that ran thin, and then X-Men Gold has just felt like a comic that was trying to replicate something that is no longer there, rather than trying to carve its own identity. So I was apprehensive regarding X-Men Red. I thought, okay, where is this going to go? How is this going to work? Not a gigantic fan of Jean Grey as a character, but this is really getting me into being a fan of her as a character. Tom Taylor, who has done some great work. His work on All New Wolverine has been a lot of fun, bringing in some of the key characters from that into this book. And this continues to build the team, bringing the team back together, dealing with the ramifications of the ending of the first issue. And now they're also looking to possibly break out another mutant who is being targeted by the Indian government due to actions that she took to try to, as she explained, replicate the pay gap that exists in her country. And it's a X-Men book through and through. It has a lot of allegorical implications about how mutants are being treated. Of course, that's what you expect from the X-Men. That's what's been their bread and butter from the beginning. I just like how Tom Taylor writes a lot of these characters, from Nightcrawler to Laura at X-23 Wolverine, and even Gabby, who's a honey badger, which I never thought I would actually have to say the name of a character being called Honey Badger. I guess that was a big thing back in the day. They're bringing it back, who knows? But I like the dynamic. I actually like Honey Badger a lot as a character. She has a lot of decent quips, and she adds a nice sense of humor to the book that's desperately needed. This is a good, I think, ragtag group of characters that all have distinct personalities, and I'm liking what he's doing with the book. This issue, I think, was a decent setup issue. Plot-wise, there's not much. I was just trying to really move things forward to the next piece, as we're still trying to find out where exactly Jean Grey wants to go. We know they're in Wakanda now after the actions of the end of last issue, where Cassandra Nova showed up and did some evil things. So I'm liking this. I like where they're going with it. Again, this doesn't feel like it's trying to be like the 90s X-Men. It doesn't feel like it's trying to be like Claremont's X-Men. It feels like it's a natural progression for these characters. It's staying true to what you want with an X-Men book, but at the same time not trying to just do what was done before. Though there are some classic characters that show up in the end, but I feel like those are the type of characters that you can bring back over and over again for the X-Men, because they're so synonymous with mutants. So I'm glad I'm enjoying an X-Men book again. It's been a while, so this has been a lot of fun, and I'm hoping it's continuing. I don't know what the future holds for the X-Men when it comes to Marvel's fresh start. There hasn't really been any titles announced for Marvel when it comes to the X-Men line. I don't know if they're just continuing as things are, or if they're going to be doing a shake-up as well. If that's the case, I hope they just keep this moving along, because I'm liking what they're doing here. This is a great X-Men book to me. It's really only the X-Men book worth reading at the moment in time, unfortunately, minus some of the solo X-Men books like All New Wolverine and things of that nature. Even like Cable, which I'm a huge Cable fan. That book has been somewhat of a disappointment. So solid stuff. If you're an X-Men fan, you're looking for a good jumping on point. This did start off of the events of Phoenix Rising that came out, that was written by Matthew Rosenberg. You don't necessarily need to read that to understand this. It may be helpful because it gives you an idea of where Jean's coming from, but I just like how she's handling this. She's really growing into a leader. I'm liking the way she's approaching this issue, and she just has some sort of diplomatic feel to her as a character, unlike some of the other Marvel characters. She does feel like the natural progression from Charles Xavier. Like, she does have her own identity, but you can see how much an influence of someone like Charles Xavier's status has had on her, and it has had on what she's trying to accomplish. So, staying in Marvel, but going over to Captain America with Captain America 699, getting ever so close to that 700 number. So you know what that means. After 700, we're going back to 1. Though, yes, of course, that's how Marvel rolls. You can't blame them. They love their anniversary issue. So what happens before the big 700? We're getting a continuation of this story by Mark Waid and Chris Samnee. And since they took this book over, this is everything that Captain America needed as a character after Secret Empire, which I didn't hate like a lot of people did. But in order to regain just the credibility as a character, a run like this is perfect. It's simple, classic storytelling, and I think there's an indication to think it's not sophisticated or that it's thematically light, because I feel like people tend to link sophistication or quality storytelling with tone rather than actual execution. If its story is darker and grittier, people think it's more adult, it's more grown up. You see that a lot with like Marvel and DC films. It's like Marvel movies are for kids, DC movies are for adults because they're dark and gritty, and it's like that's only a piece of it. It's about what you are and what you're representing and how you're telling your story. And yeah, Captain America's story right now is not the most complex, but it's just classic storytelling, and there are some great character moments within all this. With that said, I was not the hugest fan of the 98 issue. I just felt like it was a very different turn. Now, these were a lot of one and done stories, and it was the first time we actually had a story that's lasted more than one issue. And last issue, it introduced us to the fact that Steve Rogers is now in the future again, because he was frozen in ice once again, brought back, and this is dystopian future that's run by evil mutants, upper class, and it just felt a little overly heavy-handed for a book that I thought that represented more universal truths that were poignant for the character of Captain America. I didn't love the way that they brought in a lot of those for the last issue. It felt clumsy. Their heart was in the right place, the motive was in the right place, but the actual execution of it was a little bit clumsy. But now that that's settled in, this issue, I think, really won me over. We get some introductions to some major classic Marvel characters. It's no surprise. It's right on the cover with Hulk and Thing. I love the moment that we get with Thing in this, talking about how there's sophistication within this series. It's a great character moment that it could overlook just exactly what it's saying. It tells you a lot about characters, a Thing, and there's an element of tragedy with certain knowledge he becomes aware of that was pretty devastating when you think about what he was doing and the sacrifices he was making. So I think something like that can go unsung. Chris Samney, too, is just killing it on this title. I love his cartooning, his art style, his way to depict movement. I can just watch him draw Captain America throwing his shield or using his shield in inventive ways all day long. I'm so sad that he's leaving this book. I'm excited for what he's doing next, but he's just born to draw Captain America like this. It just reminds me so much of the classic Captain America. Like it's so reminiscent of his early days, but still feeling modern. This team has been doing some phenomenal work. Mark Waid's done a lot with Captain America before this. He's bringing that to this book. So if you're someone who stopped reading Captain America because you were not a fan of what Nick Spencer did with the character, and you loved more your classic Cap, this is exactly that. We know soon that Ta-Nehisi Coates is going to be taking on the book. Excited to see what he can do. I don't know. I didn't love what he did with Black Panther, but I'm much more knowledgeable of the character of Captain America, so I know when he approached the character of Black Panther, he brought in a lot of history of the character that I felt like if you didn't know, it was hard to follow. Hopefully that won't happen with Captain America. Plus, he's a more seasoned comic book writer than he was when he first started, and he admitted that he had a transition in learning exactly how to write for comics. So I am hopeful. Sad to see this run end, because this has been one of my favorite comics since Chris Samney and Mark Waid took it over. I'm just going to enjoy while it lasts, and I'm loving it. So we'll see where this goes next. All right. Well, we talked about Captain America, so let's go over to Doctor Strange Damnation number 2. And this is number 2 with the third part of this story, because the first part started with Doctor Strange Damnation number 1, then the next issue of Doctor Strange, but now Doctor Strange Damnation number 2. And this Doctor Strange book didn't have much Doctor Strange in it. It was Wong going around and bringing a team together to deal with the events of what happened with the last issue of Doctor Strange, and the fact that Mephisto is now on Earth due to Doctor Strange trying to bring all the people back who were killed in Las Vegas during Secret Empire. And doing so, Mephisto is now on Earth, runs a casino, and is a demon mob boss, basically, and has been cultivating his own gang of Avenger Ghost Riders. So it's Marvel's been doing a lot of things like this with Thanos, now with Doctor Strange just having crazy ideas that I'm actually really liking. And I love a good band come together stories when it comes to team books. You see it a lot with the first issue of series where this team finally comes together. It's a very comic cliche, very notable trope, but when done well, it can be very effective, and I thought it was done well here. The interactions between the characters was a lot of fun. Wong going around and his interaction with Blade and Bloodstone and even like Man-Thing and Brother Voodoo. It's a very cool team, and it was was intriguing about it was like he had to pick characters that could help him, but he felt if things went awry and they too fell under the spell of Mephisto, he could hopefully take them down if need be. So it's a great dynamic. I love the way that Nick Spencer writes Blade. He's got some of my favorite lines in this. Basically, sometimes they say, if you do things right, people will think you've done nothing at all. And that kind of comes up as a piece of conversation between Blade and Bloodstone. So, and then it goes off from there. I've been just having a lot of fun with this series. It was very different compared to the last arc of Doctor Strange that Donny Cates took over, and this is Nick Spencer, and both of them approaching the character. And it's a little bit more fun, I would say, not as heavily emotional as that book was. But there's also a ghost dog, and can't go wrong with a ghost dog. So I don't know, knowing this is so tied into a lot of what happened previously with Secret Empire, with the previous Doctor Strange arcs, if this is a great jumping on point for someone who's never read Doctor Strange before. But I think there's enough here that even if you don't get everything, it's not like it's the most complex story in the world. The general gist of it. He's trying to do the right thing, but it's always coming to bite him in the butt because he's taking shortcuts or he's being too arrogant. It's what Doctor Strange has done since the beginning and never continues to learn from it, because that's really how superheroes are. They can't grow too far because then they no longer are who you want them to be. But yeah, great stuff. I'm enjoying this a lot. So sometimes good things do have to come to an end, and that's the case with Hawkeye. With Hawkeye number 16, Kelly Thompson has been taking over this title now, and it's sad to see this title end because I don't think it was designed to end here. Unfortunately, it was canceled to bad sales, and I don't get why, because it's been a great book since she took it over. Hawkeye had the Matt Fraction run with David Aja, and this is nothing like that in a good way, and it shouldn't be. There are elements of it, but it never feels like a continuation or a direct continuation. Kelly Thompson succeeded at making Kate Bishop her own character with her own private eye. It felt like a lighter version of Jessica Jones, or someone who wasn't necessarily as damaged as Jessica Jones, as she was her own private investigator. This wraps up a lot in this last issue, and it doesn't necessarily feel like this was, again, designed to be a last issue. So it does try to push in as much as it possibly can within this book to wrap up some loose ends, have some decent character moments. And with that, maybe not everything gets the attention that it deserves. It's not the best way to end a book. I don't think it's ending on as good as it started. And I think in large part, it's out of the hands of the creators, because you have plans, you have ideas, you have wishes, and unfortunately they don't always come to the fruition. But I'm glad we have this series. I'm excited to see what Kelly Thompson does next. I enjoyed a lot of her writing. This is really the first time I dived deep into one of her series, but I just love her writing. She's really witty and has a good sense of humor. So, and it's a quality book. So it's obviously, unfortunately, over at this moment in time, but maybe pick up the first trade if you're looking for a good Hawkeye book, or if you loved what Matt Fraction did and want to see something like someone take those characters and do something different or put their own stamp on them. That's exactly what happened here. So kudos to everyone that was a part of this series. You did phenomenal work, and hopefully whatever you do next gets the attention it deserves, because this book certainly did not. Okay, I think we spent enough time with the big two. Time to give some more attention to those indie publishers, and let's move over to Image. As we talked about a couple Image titles that just started, there's a lot of great Image series that are still continuing and still deserve a lot of attention. And let's go to I Hate Fairyland number 17. And if you listen to episodes of The Pullback, which is also on Geekcast Radio, TFT, One Mike, and myself went through a lot of the different issues of I Hate Fairyland. We'll probably do some more of those coming up shortly as well. So if you listen to those, I'm a huge fan of this book. I love Scotty Young. This is like the book I feel like he was born to make. And I didn't think this would last after the first volume. I thought this was a really solid story. It'll be a great 4 issues for 6-issue series, but this is a joke I don't see can last much longer after that. It's going to get tired. It's going to get tedious. There's not much here beyond that. It's very cotton candy-ish with its style and look, but kudos to Scotty Young, man, because he keeps this thing rolling and it never feels old. He's finding new ways to approach this. It does seem like it is nearing its end with some of the things that happen in here, and I'm sad to see if that's actually the truth, because there are a lot of major series within Image that I've been loving for over the last few years that it feels like that they are nearing their end, and it's it's like letting a friend go, unfortunately, and we'll talk more about some of those very shortly. But this issue doesn't have its star character in it. She is no longer in Fairyland for facts that I don't want to get into, a spoiler for anyone who's not read those previous issues, because it's a recent development, but we're seeing Fairyland try to go on without her. And an old friend, Duncan Dragon, does show up, and he is really the key character in this issue. He's in what it looks like UPS / mailroom for Aya Fairyland. He's got a new job, and he's learning the ropes, and with that, he gets kind of caught into a situation where it might end up leading to the end of Fairyland, as we find out. So he's just like a person that is just can't buy any luck. There's a lot of great gags in this, seeing what is basically the devil standing in line at a mailroom. It makes you feel good in a way, because it's like, yeah, he has to wait too. And yeah, so this is a setup issue for the most part, because it's getting into I think what may be the final arc, or at least the next main arc. And it still works, though. It's not one of the Aya Fairyland's best issues so far, but it just operates as a necessary piece to keep this story moving, like I mentioned, because it could quickly feel redundant. So building up some of these characters, making them key figures. We saw a lot of the side characters get their own issues, get their own origin story. This isn't Dragon's origin story. It's more so his attempt to get back to normal life now that Gert's gone, and maybe he doesn't have to worry about her wrath anymore. But even with that, he seems to just can't get out of his own way. So this is such a fun series that it's a good one to read after you read more of a heavy story, or you just want something that like, okay, I just need to feel good. I just need to have a few laughs, enjoy myself, not think overly too hard. And that's exactly what this is. Scotty Young is a type of creator that doesn't go out of his way to impress you. He just knows what he does well, and he does it well. He wears his influences on his sleeves. If you're a person who loved Looney Tunes of the day, loved Ren and Stimpy, or kind of that gross out humor, that isn't so much in this. This is more subdued because Gert's not there, so you don't see someone trashing or destroying anyone or shooting down moons. But it's a fun world that I enjoy being part of, and I'm glad every time this comes out. So yeah, and we know now that Scotty Young will be also taking over Deadpool very shortly, and I'm waiting to see what he does with that. He's not drawing it, he's only writing it. I do prefer Scotty Young when he writes and draws his own stuff, because I think his sense of humor is best executed by himself. But for him to grow as a writer, that's something he's going to have to do, and I think his sense of humor, if you read this, and you could see, okay, a lot of jokes in here could easily work with a character like Deadpool. He's done Rocket Raccoon, and Deadpool does seem like a very smart fit. I think, it's one of the major Marvel titles that I'm really looking forward to. So, Gary Dugan has done a fun job with that title, but I think Scotty Young could bring some new life to it that's desperately needed. Speaking of long-standing Image series, East of West has come back and is now in issue number 36. This is a series that tends to take a break, come back, take a break, come back, and I have to credit the series for getting me into a lot of different titles. It was like one of the first books that I read in a while that broke me from my Marvel DC mode, and ever since then I've been diving deep into more and more indie books. This and Deadly Class have held a very special place for me. So knowing this is nearing its end, I think it has around 10 issues or so left, and then knowing Jonathan Hickman and how verbose and how thick his narratives can be, even only with 9 issues left, or having 9 issues left, things are starting to turn a corner, because there's so much within this title. This is not an issue that you can pick up and start reading if you never read anything that came before. Honestly, it's challenging to read issue to issue because there are so many moving pieces, there are so many characters, but I tend to save them up or go back and reread them and enjoy them a lot. This issue, though, I think even if you haven't done that, if you've been keeping up for the most part, will work, because it's the Endless Nation going in and taking over what's left of the Confederacy and positioning themselves as the end is near. The Prophet is focused on most of this issue as he is coming up with a plan to get this done, because in order for the Endless Nation to be able to set foot on the Confederacy land, they have to do some roundabout things to make it happen. We're also seeing Death and his son interact, and you see that things are starting to tie together. All these major threads that have been happening are starting to work. I tend to link Jonathan Hickman books to like running a marathon. If you run a marathon, it's a lot of hard work. It's you have to push yourself often to limits that you don't expect, and it's everlasting. But with all that hard work, by kicking yourself, keep pushing yourself, there's that ultimate runner's high when all that hard work, all that dedication you put in, and you get that euphoria that comes. And I feel like that is happening now with this East of West. It's been building for these 36 issues. All the pieces have been kind of put in place, and now the conclusion is coming, and now the things we've been waiting for are happening, and I'm loving it. It's been one of the best books since its debut. It's a gorgeous book to look at. It's, it does not shy away from some truly heady theories and themes, for sure. There's a lot going on in this title in general. It's a sci-fi book, it's a western book, it's a disaster book, it's about the end of the world, it has relationships. It's hard to explain this book completely within just this time period we have now. I hope to do some more deep dives into different volumes in future episodes of this Comic Concierge, because there's a lot here with the series to look into, and it's one you can spend hours talking about. That's the case with Hickman's stories. So if you loved Hickman's run on the Avengers, you like what he did on the Fantastic Four, go back, maybe pick up the first volume and see if you'll enjoy it. I think if it doesn't get you right away, it probably won't for the long haul. But if you like the characters that he's building, it only gets better from there. So knowing that there are some Image series that may be nearing their end, we obviously talked about some that are now beginning, but are there any other major Image titles that are out there to be enjoyed that could continue on and replace some of these? And one title that's not getting nearly as much attention as it should is Scales and Scoundrels, which is this classic fantasy story of these characters that come together, go on a quest, very Lord of the Rings-esque, but not as brooding, a little bit more cartoony in its execution, a little bit more all-agey, I would say. That's a weird thing to say, but it does feel like this is a book that could work for all ages, and with that still be a quality story. This is the beginning of the second volume, but really feels like the end of the first major arc. A lot of secrets or a lot of plot elements are revealed in this that have been hinted at since the beginning. One of them felt obvious. The other one was a little bit surprising, as Luna Kai, who are thought dead, are trying to find a way out, really, and they keep falling into different traps. It's a good character piece because I love their interaction back and forth, and it's a good way to end this first story. If you see a lot of the growth all these characters had, it's a tale of a crew of people that everyone had an opportunity to grow. Everyone feels like a full character, and everyone's very distinct from one another. So I really like this series a lot. If you are a fantasy fan and want something of that nature, there's other fantasy stories that are in Image right now, like Seven to Eternity. That's a much darker and grittier story. This is much more upbeat and joyous and much more fun, and it's not as serious. There are some more emotional moments, especially last issue, but for the most part, it is fantasy stories in the realm of Harry Potter or something of that nature. But good book, and one that I think deserves more attention than it's getting, and maybe because it's just the genre that it's in, that it's not everyone's cup of tea. Another major Image book that is ending is Extremity with issue number 12, and this book has been, it is a gorgeous title, brutal, the epic in every sense of the word. It's the scale of these battles that have been in this book are some of the things I don't think I've ever seen in a comic before. It exists in this different universe. It's hard to even explain the type of world that it's in. It's futuristic, but it's not like it feels like Earth in any way. I don't know. It's hard to really quantify without reading the book, and this brings a lot of the elements to the end and pieces that have been building, and there's a lot of like crazy creatures, gigantic robots, everything you can want if you've been reading this book. This is, I think, a book that I'm selling it as this huge action adventure, but it's much more than that. It really has been getting into more the horrors and ramifications of war, and you have these two factions that have been endlessly fighting, and it's this vicious cycle that's been keeping on, and how it's just led to more and more loss on both sides, and just the moral degrading that's going on with these two people trying to seek revenge, and how it's not winning. No one's winning. It's just this continuous bloody affair where lives are lost, friends are lost, family members are lost, and people are trying to, they say eye for an eye leaves the world blind, and I think that's certainly a piece of this book that comes into play. So this is, now that it's over, one epic adventure. I do feel, though, if I had one takeaway or one negative takeaway, is that I don't think it completely stuck the landing as much as I was hoping for, just because this book was at a high level for its entire run. The last few pages where it ended up, it just felt like it didn't have that satisfactory ending, that really emotionally impactful ending that I was hoping for it. And that's kind of the point of the book. The lack of satisfaction, or the lack of closure, is where much of the themes are playing out. But I thought they could handle it in a little bit more of a way to better put a cap on that point in a way where it ended up, the point it was trying to make felt very rushed within the last few pages or so. So where it was trying to say got lost in it for the most part. But everything leading up to this point has been nearly flawless. And again, the art in this has been fantastic. I'm pretty sure that's probably why it's ending, because it must take days upon days, months upon months to get some of this work done, because the detail, the colors, the creature design, the character design, everyone feels distinctive yet of one, because you have all these different tribes that are coming together. It's I know I see this book just gaining in popularity as more people come to it, and I could easily see this becoming something else, whether it be a series, a cartoon series. It feels like it's designed to be transferred into some other medium. It might be a little bit more difficult just because of the scale of much of the story, but it's worth it because it's been one of the better Image titles, and Image's been putting a lot of great books. This has been one of their best ones, and sad to see it end, but I think it is ending at the right point in time. Also coming back this week was The Fix number 11, written by Nick Spencer and drawn by Steve Lieber. And The Fix has been a series I've had a lot of fun with. It's hard sometimes, to be honest with you, because there are pieces of this that make me kind of groan a little bit. The sense of humor here can be sophomoric and a little bit crude, but that's also kind of the point. It's taking that noir framework and saying what would happen if you took these stories and the characters that were in them were really reprehensible garbage people, because this is a book about bad people doing bad things. There's no one really to root for. Even the mayor is kind of a twat, and these are detectives that have no moral high ground regarding anything they do. They'll break the law, so do whatever they can to get ahead. When some awful things happen, they're not thinking about the ramifications. They're really thinking about how it benefits themselves, and that makes this issue a little strange, because a major piece happens. Really, the first, I would say, not emotional, but it takes a different turn. It's been mostly a comedic series for the most part, and here something happens that turns that sharply. It reminds me a lot of like Lethal Weapon or something of that nature, but if you did it with a modern sensibility or sense of humor, and then you would still have, if you watch Lethal Weapon, and it has some darker moments, and this has one of those darker moments, or it has things that happen where you feel like, oh, there's actual real life stakes in this, not just everyone's gonna get out okay, because this is an issue, without spoiling anything, where not everyone gets out okay. So I was surprised by that, because I didn't expect it with this book so far. And even with that, they take a tragedy and get a lot of humor out of it. Specifically, one character who finds out the loss of one of his close allies or friends, and goes on a bender that is a sight to behold, to say the least. But it does up the stakes. It does add new tension to this, because now we know that, okay, that things are real here. There are ramifications to a lot of these actions, even though there's a decent amount of silliness. I mean, you have you're dealing with ISIS, oddly enough, and I don't know. It's been a good book. I could see this turning off a lot of people because it can be crass, and I think some people would think, well, this is really immature at times, and I get that, but like I said, I think it's almost like how South Park can be ridiculous and raunchy, and a lot of people can focus on that, but there's actually an element of intelligence, of sophistication there. I don't necessarily think this is commenting anything like that. I don't think there's much social or political commentary, but I do think that it's not as blatant or as shallow as it may seem, but not by much. I think what really makes this is the humor, and if it doesn't work for you, Nick Spencer, who I talked about already in this podcast, it does write this book, and I like his sense of humor. This is where it's raw and unedited. You see it a little bit with like Ant-Man, he did previously, and Superior Foes. This is much more the R-rated version of that. And I think it works for me. I could see for a lot of people, though, it might not. But we might dive deeper into this series also in the future. So if you've read this, I'd like to see what people think of it, because I don't know what the overall consensus is. I know Nick Spencer tends to have a lot of people that do not like him, at least in the sense of his social media presence. I don't know what they think of this actual title, but maybe many of them don't know he writes it. I'm not sure. But I am a fan, and I feel like it is a title that could work for a lot of people, and myself included. Before we move on to other publishers, let's talk about one more Image title with The Walking Dead 177, that book that just keeps on going. Talked about Robert Kirkman earlier with Oblivion song. Hey, his classic series is still going with 177, and I gotta give this series a lot of credit. Last week I talked about Saga and how sometimes we can take it for granted because it is consistently good. This is 177 issues in, and still finds ways to keep the story moving and find ways to develop these characters. And I think what's been working for this current arc is that there's actually been a level of pleasantness in this book, some actual happiness for a change. And as we found out a few issues ago that Michonne's daughter is actually alive, and now they have some interaction with one another, and their interaction, of course, is emotionally charged, but it gets even deeper as we learn. They talk to each other regarding how they got themselves there. We learn more about the tragedy or the horrors that her daughter had to face, and how it very much parallels many of the tragedies that Michonne herself faced. There's also different pieces of this arc where there's a new character is introduced, and since it's a new character introduced in The Walking Dead, I'm sure this is like going for gangbusters on eBay, because anytime that happens, the price just shoots up the roof. Mercer, though, he's a soldier in this new compound that we found ourselves in. It's a compound that's like bigger than any one we've seen before. It's almost the size of a normal sized city and operates as such. We don't know what's really going on here, though. It seems like we're getting an idea of where this next big story is headed. I think that's going to be the major question for me. Like, this Michonne daughter part has been very satisfying, but ultimately, like, I don't know how much more the series can go, because there is some repetitiveness where we had the Whispers. I thought that was inventive and new, but is this going to be just another villain for Rick and the others to fight? Is this going to actually work out okay? I'm not sure. Every time I think the series can't really go on any further or do anything new, they find a way to do that. So I'll just wait and see where this is headed. I love that we are getting some new characters introduced, and Robert Kirkman is a king at introducing characters and developing them quickly, making you care about them either because you hate them or because you love them, or vice versa. So knowing that there is this Mercer lying in the background, it does, though, tend to reveal itself a little too much, because now you feel like, okay, well, if he is on the cover, if he's a big push of a character, clearly he's going to be playing a major role in... Right now, he's just really a security guard, so if he's playing a bigger role than that, things need to happen. So is that tipping its hand a little bit too soon? I'm not sure. We'll see. Kirkman does like to do that, make you think, okay, oh, you figured me out. No, you didn't. And here's the thing. We're itching closer to issue 200, which is crazy. The fact that this book has been around as long as it has, and still remains this high level. Like, I still think, there have been some bad issues of The Walking Dead. I mean, you're 177 issues and it's going to happen, but Robert Kirkman's really good at just making you feel like the story never ends. How it picks up from one issue to the next if you're reading it in graphic novel form. There's no obvious breaks. The pacing is pretty impressive. I don't know how he keeps it going, but he does. So, yeah. I mean, if you're reading Walking Dead or you're not reading Walking Dead, I don't think my opinion will change much, but I think it's cool to kind of see how this is actually one of the stories that has a different start than many of the other Walking Dead arcs that we've seen in the past. We talked a lot about Image, and there are other indie publishers out there, so let's talk about some of those. We'll go with the Boom Studios first with Matt Cadet U number 7, and the way I describe the series is that comics are better with having this series in it for a variety of reasons. It's a series I think that could work for someone who's 7 or 70, which is, kind of cliche to say, but it does work. It probably maybe not 70, but if you're someone who enjoyed anything like Voltron or Power Rangers or any giant robot types of stories, Pacific Rim or something like that, this has a lot of that in it, but it never feels derivative. I think that's, even for someone who really loved Pacific Rim, I don't necessarily feel like it really strived in creating good characters. Mechatet U has, and it's a different format. Obviously, they have more time to do that, but this group of kids is going into something special. I love how you have all these different archetypes, or it sounds as archetypes, but no one fits into anything specifically, or the tropes are not exact. And I love how you have all these kids, and there's no forced-in love story. They're kids that are allowed to be like kids, and that's so rare when it comes to comics or movies or really any type of medium, where if kids are in a story, they're often wise beyond their years or a plot device or something of that nature. Here, they're the main piece. They are what's driving this story, and do so in ways that I wouldn't expect. They make mistakes. They're mature for their age, but in a way that makes sense considering the situation that they're in. And you have giant robots fighting giant monsters. It never gets away from that all too much. But what we're also seeing is that there are a lot of politicking, and there's some shady things going on with the government, as you would expect. And these characters, these young kids, are put in situations where they have to make some really hard, tough choices and determine what is right. Sometimes it's right not to listen. Sometimes it's right to break the rules. And for adults, we kind of know that. But for kids, I could see why this is teaching a very important lesson on all different factors. So Greg Peck writes this book, and this issue, it's really, things are heating up. There is a looming threat coming closer and closer. It seems like the end may be near. The mech cadets are pried away from their own robots, and we learn some things that are happening that make you wonder, okay, humans may be not the most trustworthy creatures in the world, and some of their actions may lead to their ultimate demise, as you would expect. You have humans who see a piece of technology and they can't respect it. They want to make it their own, and they want to improve upon it in somehow. So this was one of the, I think, biggest pleasant surprises from last year. And this year's still working well. I don't know if this is a book that can go on for 20 more issues. I don't know if we'll get Matt Cadet U 177 like we have with Walking Dead. But for now, it's working. And not every book needs to have 177 issues. Sometimes 15, 20 is enough. Sometimes 6 is enough. So sometimes 8 is enough, as they say. I don't know how many issues this is going to go. I like to not know, because I think if you know the end point, it could really kill tension in a story if you know where it's going. So if okay, this can't be the last issue because there's 4 more or there's 2 more. But when you don't know that, it gives you, I think, a much more piece of enjoyment than you would expect. So for some series, that's impossible for that to happen because they're never going to end. They're never ending Batman. But for others like this, it does hold the door open. All right, staying in Boom, but going to a different book with Dodge City number 1. Yes, Boom has a book about dodgeball. They have a book about fencing I talked about a few weeks ago that I liked. So I was wondering, would I like this book about dodgeball? And the answer is not really all that much, unfortunately. But I'm not necessarily the target audience for this book. This does seem like a very kid-centric book. Unlike something like Matt Cadet U, which I think could work for all ages, for middle-aged men or kids, Dodge City is squarely designed for children, and that's okay. I think sometimes it's good to have books that are designed for kids, meant for kids, and only for kids. Like there are books that are for adults, only for adults. But still, I think this book could have been better, even with that said. I have a son, so I do read a lot of kids' stories, and there are great kids' stories, and there are bad kids' stories, and this is, I think, in the middle story. It is what it is. It's a dodgeball story where all centered on dodgeball, and you have this after-school activity with these different teams that are going off against one another. A lot of characters in it, and that's kind of the problem. I thought there were maybe too many characters. Got a little bit lost, especially if this is meant for a kid's audience. When you pack the story that full with different people, and never feels like there are many memorable characters outside of, really, it seems like to be the key kid who's this new kid in town who's put on the team. It's very bad at dodgeball, but finds ways to be good. So it was weird that the entire issue was the dodgeball game and nothing else. When I talked about fence, I think part of it was fencing, but you also allowed the characters to grow outside of that. This was just within the dodgeball medium, like game. There was nothing else outside of that, and maybe seeing a piece of that would make it a little bit more effective, because you learn more about these characters. I don't know. Maybe that's the premise of this book. We do find out the team we think is good may not actually be good, so we'll see how that goes. I'll probably pick up the next issue, because I do like to support all ages comics, and it's a good thing to have if my son wants to read something that's not Curious George. Hey, in a few years, this might be a good book for him to read. So, though I think probably when he's in school, they'll outlaw dodgeball, so it'll be a moot point anyways. But I know when I was a kid, I was a fan of dodgeball, but maybe I was just a sad gym class hero. Who knows? All right, well, let's go over the world of Dark Horse, and specifically the world of Black Hammer, with Dr. Star #1. I actually recently talked with Greg Beppler, former member of Talking in Circles podcast, or current member of Talking in Circles podcast, regarding Black Hammer. That will be out as an episode very shortly. So, spoiler alert, we talk about it and say many good things. So because of that, I've been picking up a lot of these spin-off series with Black Hammer. There's Sherlock Frankenstein and now Dr. Star. And from what I can remember, Dr. Star is not a character that really got utilized much, or we learned much about within the pages of Black Hammer. I love how much Jack Lemire is expanding this world, getting all these different characters. It is very reminiscent of something like Astro City that I've read a little bit of. I need to read more. This is his story, Dr. Star's story, his origin story, and this entire issue he is writing to someone, or we think we know who it is, and it's split between his past in his present, and his past is drawn and acted more like the classic story, where his present is a lot more drab, and you see that he has a lot of regret regarding a lot of decisions that he has made and the problems that it caused. And I don't want to give anything away, but I love this. It's a great origin story. There's a lot of things here that to really enjoy, but what this issue did for me, where it really hit me, was in the final pages, when you find out just exactly why he is not as happy with some of the choices that he made in the past, and why he doesn't think being a hero was worth the cost that it laid upon him. It has you hinted. It hints at what you think is going to happen. It hints at what you think. Okay, this is a really personal problem that happened with him. That this is certainly causing some problems here. We could see where this is going, but I don't know. That final page was one that's going to stick with me for some time. And that's because, Jeff Lemire is an amazing storyteller. And we talked about Kirkman twice. We're talking about Lemire twice. And it's very different than Gideon Falls. Much more of a straightforward superhero story, but with a more realistic human element to it, as you would expect, just like with Black Hammer. Not as good as Black Hammer, but much different than Black Hammer. I just love this world, what he's doing with it. So it's becoming its own little universe, and with its a style that's certainly reminiscent of Golden Age. So if you want to see like deconstructive storytelling that is working really well within the pages of comics, that is Black Hammer, and that is all the miniseries, including this one, Dr. Star #1. All right. Well, we have Dr. Star #1. We also have Green Hornet #1 from Dynamite. And Green Hornet is not a character I have a huge history with. I watched some of the TV show, mostly when it had like reruns, when FX was like first starting. It had a lot of those shows that would have on reruns with this. And I think the 66 Batman would go back to back. So I don't know much about Green Hornet. I did watch the Seth Rogen movie, if that helps. So I'll say that this is Green Hornet #1, and the Green Hornet is missing. Without the Green Hornet, people have been trying to take his place in the crime world, causing chaos and destruction and death and crime to run rampant throughout the society. So I don't know if there's mystery here tied to past Green Hornet series. I just picked this up from Stage 1. I don't know if this is continuing a previous story. It doesn't feel like it per se, but it's a first issue. It was fine. The big thing is the fact that who is Green Hornet, and I'm not getting anything away because it's right on the cover. Kato's daughter is actually turning into Green Hornet, and that was really what this issue was leading towards, was that big reveal. And it's tough when that is the purpose of your first issue of the comic, to get to the point where your cover is at. It's not a satisfying ending, really. It's like, oh, she's going to be Green Hornet. Yeah, I knew that before I read this. And yeah, I get you did some more things here, but I don't know. As someone who's not a lover of this world, not a connoisseur of Green Hornet, this didn't do a whole lot for me in the sense of making me want to go back and read a lot of Green Hornet. It was okay. Nothing about it really shined through. It's the classic idea of, okay, what happens if you take one figurehead away? What are the repercussions? These are the repercussions. I don't feel like I learned much about. I keep saying Kato's daughter because I honestly don't remember her name, and there wasn't really much to her outside the fact that she could beat up her dad. I guess that's cool. I don't know. I mean, we all want to do that, but we'll see. I might continue it, but I probably won't, to be honest with you. So if you're a huge Green Hornet fan and you want something a little bit different, it's there, but probably not for me, unfortunately. So for now, let's go with a complete left turn into Jughead the Hunger #3, brought to us by Archie Comics. Archie Comics has been doing a lot of inventive things with a lot of their properties recently, or over the last few years. We've had the Afterlife with Archie, that was much more of a horror book. We also had Sabrina, that took a darker, more realistic tone with that character, much different than the classic TGIF series that I grew up on in the 90s, sad to say. But hey, I was a TGIF devout fan, and a lot of us had little crushes on Melissa Joan Hart. It's hard not to. I was a teenager. What are you going to do? But anyways, that's way off topic. For Jughead the Hunger #3, and the idea behind this is the fact that Jughead, the person who can't stop eating hamburgers, well, what if the reason he is so hungry is because his family comes from a long line of werewolves? And that has been this story. This issue, though, Jughead is nowhere to be seen. It's a backtrack issue. It's a origin story, or bringing us to the fold as we learn more about the mysterious aunt of Betty Cooper and her story and her linkage to werewolves in the past, and how she had a similar Romeo and Juliet situation where she fell in love with someone that maybe she should not have. And this has been okay. I think it's maybe one too many in the sense of, okay, they got Afterlife the Archie to work. Oh, what could work now? Oh, here's a pitch, Jughead as a werewolf. And I don't know, it's not really working for me as well. Maybe because I'm not as huge into the werewolf lore, or it's not a thing that attracts me as much. I just have a hard sense of getting an idea of where these characters come from, or really the purpose behind all this. We see that as werewolves, they're much more vicious than they mean to be, and there's been a lot of basically inconsistencies with the behavior of characters. And I don't know if that's just because, hey, this is part of what happens when you're a werewolf, but it just seems to be somewhat of a contrivance. I'm not sure. It's been fun, I guess, but I was having high hopes because I thought Afterlife with Archie was really fantastic and really hit that genre. And that's the other thing. It doesn't really feel like a werewolf story. It just, I don't know. It feels like almost reminiscent of From Dusk Till Dawn, but with werewolves in a way. But a lot of people love From Dusk Till Dawn, and I enjoy it myself. But it's a little all over the place, and I walk away just thinking, well, this issue was a little offbeat. I don't really care that much about the aunt of Betty Cooper. You know, I'm reading Jughead the Hunger, I want to see this concept with those characters. If you take me away from those characters, then what I like about this, what I want to see about it, is no longer there. It's like, well, the whole idea behind this is taking classic Archie characters and putting them into situations in which you would not expect that universe to be. Once you remove that, once you get far away from that, it doesn't work as well. Once you put the focus on other characters, it's like, well, that entire point is lost in a way. And I don't know if Betty Cooper's aunt is a major player in the comic or the regular Archie universe. I've read some Archie, the current series. She's not really been a character so far. Maybe she's more of a classic character, but I'm a little disappointed with the series so far. There's just been some problems with it, but you know, it could just be one that like is better read in trade, or a lot of the issues that I've seen by the end might be fixed, but I highly kind of doubt it. So I'll report back with next issue to see if it gets back to what I want to see with this book, because I do think I like the, you know, concept, or like, okay, that's actually kind of clever if that's the reason that Jughead's a werewolf. But I feel like after that, anything that's come after that idea has not really lived up to the potential it's created for itself, unfortunately. All right, well, one more issue, and then we are out of here. Not last, but not least, but also not best. Another #1 brought to us by IDW is the Spider King #1. And talking about genre mashups, this is another genre mashup where you have Vikings fighting aliens. Why not, right? I mean, we've had cowboys and aliens. Why not Vikings and aliens? And this is a book, though, I think that was a graphic novel series first, and now is being released into serials, which explains why it's a much thicker book. It's like around 40 pages rather than the normal 22 or 32. And I don't know if that's a reason why this first issue, pacing-wise, just felt off at times. It centers on this one Viking who sees his dad get killed, and then he has to try to pick up that mantle. And what we've seen is that he's kind of failed. His army is not as strong. His land is being taken over by the rival Vikings, and you have this major Viking conquest going on with these two factions. And that was the bulk of the issue for the most part. And by the time we got to the end, it felt like almost like an afterthought. I thought there were just points in which that alien looming threat would show itself, but it just continued on with the Viking story, and like I said, the pacing itself felt odd. Where it ended, where certain events occurred, it just felt like certain moments went on beyond their means, and by the end of it, I was just a little bit lost. The art style is really cartoonish, which makes the violence or the blood and gore, you won't be as taken aback with it. But I do feel sometimes that the art is all over the place. It is very busy at times, overly busy, and to the point where it's hard to really fully comprehend everything that's here. At the end of the day, it is Vikings fighting aliens, and I like that idea. The alien design, the alien creatures were okay. I think that can make or break your alien story, what your aliens look like, and these were okay. We'll see how it goes from here. But it's fun. The actual character designs work, and like I said, I do like the cartoonish nature of it. Just I hope that panel-wise, or being able to put enough on the page that the story can be told and not be overly cluttered for the most part. But yeah, it's by IDW, and like I said, this was a original graphic novel, I believe, first. And with that, you're just really trying to find an artificial cutting off point and put it within this series, so that could be why it doesn't flow as well. It's trying to take a movie that's already been made and then like sequelize it. That's kind of hard. You're not gonna have a legitimate cutting off point, or have a place that really feels like you're going through that traditional structure of a comic or a movie, and that somewhat feels like that's happening here. But again, I would still recommend it if the concept interests you. If you're a huge Vikings fan, or you want to see some cool Viking action, hey, have at it. That's Spider King #1. So, man, It was a busy week in the world of comics. I honestly even had more to talk about, but I just felt like I could only go so far with this episode. So if there are a major book that you felt like I missed, well, that's okay. I'll try to catch up with it here and there. You can contact me at movierevolt@geekcastradio.com. I'm also on Twitter at movierevolt. You can go to the episode page at geekcastradio.com as well. Coming up on the docket this week, I will be talking with Matt from Simplistic Reviews on the series Harrow County by Cullen Bunn and produced by Dark Horse. So we talked about Dark Horse a little bit here today. We'll be going into that later as well. In addition, I have some articles out. If you want to look at what I ranked as the best comic books of February, I did a list at geekcastradio.com. I did the top 30, and I'll be doing one for March as well. And I think we have a lot of contenders this week that can end up being some of the best books of March. If they don't make it, that means this is one fantastic book month for comics, and I would be completely okay with that. But thanks for listening to this episode. I appreciate you hearing me go on this rambling rampage each week. If you enjoy the show, subscribe on iTunes, leave us some reviews, share. I'm really trying to get this podcast off the ground now that we're a few weeks in. I've been enjoying it. I hope you've been enjoying it as well. But from now, remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
We've got the American Jesus, fostering national faith. We've got the American Jesus, overwhelming millions every day. He's a farmer bearing fields, the books the army wields, expressions on the faces of the starting millions, the power of the plan, the few that drives the clan. He's the motive and the conscience of the murderer. He's a preacher on TV, the false sincerity, the fun that it's written by the big computer.